She paid for the wedding, every detail, every dollar. But on the big day, they didn't even let her in. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's about dignity, silence, and one mother's quiet revenge. If stories like this move, you don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. More untold truths are waiting. The last time I held Benjamin's hand was 3 weeks before the wedding. We were standing in line at a small bakery off Route 43. It was raining and he'd forgotten his umbrella. I offered mine. He took it, smiled softly, and held my fingers for just a second too long enough to make me believe that he still saw me. He said, "You're the only person I trust to handle this, Mom." This, of course, meant the wedding, the venue, the catering, the open bar, the endless emails with vendors, and the checkbook I guarded like a sacred relic. I had taken on the burden of making sure my son's big day would be perfect, because that's what mothers do. That's what I had always done. Even when I didn't have much, I made sure Benjamin had everything. The planning had taken a year. Every detail reviewed, revised, and reapproved through spreadsheets I color-coded late into the night. I had notes for everything: flowers, seating, lighting, transportation. I even handled last-minute coordination with the bridal makeup team when their assistant came down with COVID 2 days before the rehearsal. No one thanked me, but I didn't expect thanks. I just wanted a seat, not a spotlight, not a speech. Just one chair, one smile, a hand to hold during the first dance. Instead, on the morning of the wedding, I received a text. Not even from Benjamin, from Sarah's mother. "Hi, Margaret. Just to confirm, today's event is a bit more modern and intimate. We're trying to keep the aesthetic really clean and minimal. The couple has decided that only the wedding party and immediate parents will be inside during the ceremony and reception. Thank you for understanding. Immediate parents." I blinked at the screen for a long time. I was the immediate parent. There was no follow-up, no call, no explanation. I waited an hour before calling Benjamin. He didn't answer. I still put on my dress. It was soft lavender, chiffon. The color he always said made me look like spring was finally here. I'd had it tailored specially. Sarah's color palette was gold and wine red, so I deliberately chosen something subtle, neutral, respectful. I curled my hair, light makeup, the same earrings I wore to his high school graduation. I took a photo of myself in the mirror, not to post, just to remember that I'd tried, that I had shown up. I drove myself to the venue, an old vineyard-turned-event space. I'd paid the deposit the previous spring when Benjamin told me they were dreaming of a rustic chic celebration. I remembered his exact words, full of excitement. "We want it to feel timeless, Mom. Elegant but relaxed. Can you help make it happen?" And I did. But that morning when I arrived, the security guard at the gate barely looked at me. Name, he asked, not unkindly but mechanically. "Margaret Langley," I replied. "Mother of the groom." He checked the list, scanned again. His face stiffened slightly. He tapped his radio, then leaned toward me through the half-open window. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not on the guest list for today's event. I was instructed to keep non-registered visitors at the entrance." My throat tightened. "I paid for this venue," I said quietly. He looked uncomfortable. "I'm just following instructions, ma'am." I didn't argue. What would be the point? I parked a few hundred feet away in the gravel lot. The ceremony was starting in 20 minutes. I sat in my car with the engine off, staring through the windshield as golf carts moved across the green with guests holding programs I had designed. I watched from a distance. I saw Sarah walk down the aisle on her father's arm. I saw Benjamin standing under the arbor of white hydrangeas I had insisted on upgrading even though it cost an extra $400. I listened to the music. I'd chosen an acoustic version of Here Comes the Sun. I recognized it instantly because I had emailed the band the request myself. And yet I was not welcome. I didn't cry, not at first. I sat very still in my car, hands folded, watching the wedding I had built unfold without me. Watching the boy I had raised pledge his future to someone else while erasing me from his present. At one point, Sarah's mother stepped up to the microphone and gave a speech. I could hear her voice through the speakers echoing across the vineyard. Thank you to all our dear family and friends for being here to witness this beautiful union. And a special thank you to everyone who made today possible. Your support means the world to us. Everyone, except me. I opened my purse and took out a copy of the final wedding invoice. $47,800. I had covered nearly all of it. And in return, I was sitting in a dusty Subaru hidden in the gravel lot behind a line of trees. At the end of the ceremony, guests flowed toward the reception hall for cocktails. I waited. Maybe Benjamin would come find me. Maybe he'd bring me inside. Maybe this was all a mistake. Maybe. But no one came. I sat there for another hour. The sun dipped low. The air turned sharp and cool. And when I saw the first string lights flicker on inside the barn, I finally started the engine. I drove home in silence, not even the radio. When I got inside, I placed the dress back on its hanger, removed my makeup, and sat at the kitchen table. I opened my laptop, pulled up the contracts, the spreadsheets, every agreement, every email, every deposit confirmation, my name on all of them. I stared at the glowing screen until the ache in my chest dulled into something colder. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow you decide what comes next. But tonight I let myself feel it all. The humiliation, the absence, the slow, sharp grief of being forgotten by the very person I gave my life to. The next morning, the dress still hung from the bedroom door. Lavender chiffon now wrinkled along the waist where I had gripped it in the car with trembling hands. I hadn't touched it since returning home. It looked like it had exhaled a garment that knew it had done its part and now simply waited to be folded away with the rest of my illusions. But I left it there. I needed to see it. I needed the reminder. I brewed a pot of coffee, though the thought of drinking it made my stomach twist. The kitchen clock ticked too loud. The fridge hummed like it was holding its breath. Outside, the wind pushed brittle leaves across the sidewalk. Everything felt heavier than usual. My skin, my bones, my silence. At 8:23 a.m., I opened the folder. It was a simple red faux leather accordion binder, the kind you buy in office supply stores when you mean business. Inside were 12 neatly labeled tabs, one for each month of wedding planning, one for the venue, one for the florist, one for the bar service, one for the band. Each page bore my handwriting tidy and precise, notes in the margins, highlighted totals, adjustments Sarah had requested, extra rows for the late-night espresso bar she just had to have. I had said yes to every whim, every small detail that became a big bill, all because Benjamin asked. And I couldn't bring myself to say no. I turned to the final payments tab. There, in bold marker, was a single line I had written the night before the wedding. Remaining balances hold until post-event confirmation. The words stared back at me. I'd written them after a long call with the venue coordinator who had assured me everything was in place. The only thing missing from their end, the final $13,000 due by Monday. I was supposed to transfer it after the wedding. Supposed to. I walked over to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a yellow notepad. I began to list every vendor with an outstanding balance. My hand moved slowly at first, then steadier, bolder. Venue, $7,000. Band, $2, $500 bar service. $1, $800 photographer digital rights. $1,300. Each name felt like another pulse of pain. Not because of the money, but because of what that money represented: trust, time, love, a sacrifice built not just from dollars, but from decades of devotion, from bedtime stories and back-to-school shoes, from birthday cakes I'd baked even when I couldn't afford the eggs. And this exclusion was my thank you. At 10:07 a.m., I made my first call. The venue. The woman who answered sounded cheerful, chipper, the tone people use when they assume you're calling to rave about how lovely the wedding was. Hi, this is Margaret Langley. I'm calling regarding the Benjamin Langley and Sarah Whitmore event held yesterday. A pause, a smile in her voice. Yes, of course. It went beautifully. I trust everything was to your satisfaction. I took a slow breath. Actually, I'm calling to request a formal hold on the final payment. There were some contractual discrepancies. I will not be authorizing release of the remaining balance. The chipper tone vanished. A beat of silence. May I ask what kind of discrepancies? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. Please refer to the clause under Section 4C. All key stakeholders to have event access and approval during execution of services. I was not permitted entry. Her reply was cautious, legal. The conversation ended quickly, professionally, and with one sentence I hadn't expected to say, "Consider this a formal dispute of services rendered." I hung up, closed my eyes, and for the first time in 48 hours, I exhaled without shaking. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was doing something. By noon, I'd sent 4 emails, each one tailored, respectful, direct. To the photographer, please do not release any galleries until further notice. Final licensing payment has been withheld. To the band, no audio recording should be distributed or archived. Balance remains unpaid due to contractual breach. To the bar, cancel any charges for extended hour service. I was not in attendance. I cannot verify or approve. Each click of the send button steadied me. Not because I was retaliating, but because I was reclaiming control. They had removed me from the table, but I still held the pen. At 2:00 p.m., I folded the lavender dress and placed it in a cedar-lined box, not as a relic of shame, but as evidence, a quiet protest, proof that I showed up, that I had tried, that I had held my end of the bargain even when no one else did. I placed the red ledger next to it. Then I locked the box and slid it under the bed. I didn't eat that day. I couldn't. But I slept. For the first time in 3 nights. A deep, dreamless sleep. And when I woke up, something inside me had changed. Something quiet, subtle, but irreversible. I no longer hoped Benjamin would call. I no longer needed him to. It had taken me 3 hours to get ready that morning. Not because I was vain or foolish or hopeful in the romantic way people often mock mothers for being, but because I believed, maybe naively, that this was going to be one of the rare days in a woman's life when her love gets to be seen. Not just felt, seen, acknowledged, held up in the light. I'd picked the lavender dress after weeks of searching. I'd had it hemmed, properly tailored at the bust and stitched with tiny beads that caught the sun like tiny stars. I even wore the pearl earrings Benjamin gave me in high school after I helped him with his college essay. They were fake, of course, but meaningful, or so I thought. The invitation had never arrived. I chalked it up to a mistake, a printing delay, mail getting lost. They said the wedding was intimate, curated, modern. No church pews, no large guest lists, just a sleek glass venue in downtown Columbus. Vibe over volume Sarah had posted online. The caption underneath a photo of her trying on designer heels read, "We're keeping things elevated." When I showed up to the venue that afternoon, the valet asked for my name. I told him. He checked a list, then looked up at me with a pause that lasted a second too long. "Oh, you're Benjamin's mother," I smiled. "Yes, that's right. I think you're supposed to check in with the event manager." "Just a moment, ma'am." He didn't take my keys. He didn't offer to park my car. He stepped inside and left me standing there on the curb in heels I hadn't worn in 5 years. I looked down at my hands, trembling just slightly. I clutched the small clutch purse I'd bought at an outlet mall. Inside it, tissues, my phone, and a folded note I had written at 2 a.m. the night before. Just one sentence. "I'm proud of you." 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, a woman with a headset stepped outside. Young, polished, efficient in the way someone is when they're paid to be polite but can't hide their urgency. "Hi, you must be Mrs. Langley. I'm afraid we've had a little change in plan." The couple has opted for a no parentals moment before the vows. It's part of their storytelling arc. She said it like I would understand, like I would nod and say, "Ah, yes, of course. I remember when people used to edit their mothers out of their wedding stories for aesthetic continuity." I blinked. "So I can't go in." She smiled gently. "It's not personal, just part of the vision." I felt my throat close up. "I paid for this vision." She didn't flinch. "I'm sorry. There's a viewing lounge set up just across the street. There's complimentary tea, and we'll be streaming the ceremony on a flat screen." Like I was a fan, not a mother. Like this was a sporting event. I didn't go to the lounge. I stood on the other side of the street watching through glass as guests sipped champagne. I saw Sarah's mother, glittering in navy chiffon pearls, swinging like wind chimes, guiding guests to their seats like she was the hostess of the century. I saw Benjamin. Not once did he look out the window. Not once did he check his phone. Not once did he come out. The vows began, and I stood there, coat wrapped tightly around my arms, despite the unseasonably warm April air. Every time a guest laughed or clapped or raised their glass, the sound was muffled through the glass, like joy behind a wall I wasn't meant to enter. My feet ached, but I didn't leave, because even in exile, I wanted to see my son happy, even if it broke me. When they kissed, I didn't cry. When they danced, I didn't blink. I just stood there memorizing every gesture like I would never be allowed to remember it again. Because in a way, I wouldn't. Not like this. Not as his mother. Not as someone worthy of a seat at the table. I had become background, a shadow, an afterthought, but I was still there. When the cake was wheeled out, I stepped back, a slow exhale, one I'd been holding for 3 years. Since the moment Sarah had said to me at brunch, "You'll just let us handle the vision, right, Margaret? We really want this to feel elevated. Elevated, like I was something cheap. Like love, time, and sacrifice could be filtered through an Instagram aesthetic and cut out like a pimple from a wedding photo." At sunset, I walked back to my car. Not a single guest looked my way, not even Benjamin. And when I sat in the driver's seat, the lavender dress crumpled beneath me. The note still tucked in my purse. I whispered the words I should have said out loud years ago. "You may have erased me, but I kept the receipts." Margaret drove home in silence. No music, no podcast, no soothing NPR voices filling the hollow space. Just the quiet hum of tires against asphalt and the occasional flicker of wedding lights fading in the rearview mirror. Her lavender dress wrinkled beneath her as she sat, pearls, undone lipstick fading at the edges of her smile like everything else that evening. On the passenger seat was her clutch still unopened since she left the curb. Inside it, the handwritten note she never got to give her son. 3 simple words in cursive. "I'm proud of you." She gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white, not from anger, but from restraint, from trying to keep her body from shaking, from shattering. She had stayed the whole time, all 3 hours. She had watched other mothers dance, watched Sarah's father wipe a single performative tear, watched Benjamin laugh in a tuxedo she had paid for with 2 years of her pension and the last of her husband's life insurance. But no one had saved her a chair. The drive back to the suburbs of Akron felt longer than it should have. Her heels dug into the carpet, aching from a day spent standing still. It was just after midnight when she turned onto her street, dim, familiar, unchanging. The kind of neighborhood where people still wave at each other even when they don't talk. As she parked in front of her 1-story home, she sat in the car for a full minute before cutting the engine. The house was dark, quiet. The porch light flickered like it always did, a weak bulb she kept forgetting to replace. Inside, she didn't turn on the overheads, just a single lamp in the living room. Warm amber, gentle on tired eyes. She placed her purse down first, then the shoes, then the envelope from the church, the one she wasn't in, and finally the thin navy blue binder she'd brought back with her. She had packed it weeks before, just in case anyone had questions, just in case someone asked. No one did. She opened the binder slowly like it was a wound she needed to check. Inside a neatly typed budget spreadsheet color-coded. Rows for catering, for floral arrangements, for linen rentals. Each marked paid, some in red, some in green. All initialed M. Langley. Then the contracts. One for the venue. Another for the jazz band that played a Frank Sinatra cover during the first dance. One from a boutique vendor that provided a custom neon sign reading The Langleys Est, 2024. She had signed all of them. She had negotiated deposits, arranged deadlines, confirmed wire transfers, even printed copies for backup. Her fingers ran over each page like she was touching pieces of herself, proof that she existed in the story. If not in the photo album, then at least in the foundation. They might have written me out of the reception, she whispered to no one. But this is my name, my ink, my legacy. She leaned back on the couch binder, resting on her knees, and let her head tilt against the wall. Everything hurt, but nothing bled. It wasn't just the money. It was the memory of his first loose tooth, the one he was too scared to pull, so she let him fall asleep in her lap while she sang off-key lullabies. It was the spaghetti dinners made from ketchup and hot dogs because rent came first. It was the way he used to reach for her hand in crowded stores, even at 10 years old. And now he let her stand in the cold while another woman's mother gave the toast. She rose slowly, walked to her bedroom, and changed into flannel pajamas that still smelled like fabric softener and lavender oil. On the nightstand next to an old photo of Benjamin in kindergarten, missing teeth, holding a macaroni necklace. She placed the binder down gently, like a memorial. Not because she was giving up, but because she knew now the cost of love isn't just money. It's watching the person you raised forget who taught them how to hold a fork. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She lay there in her queen-size bed, too big for one, too small for the ache in her chest. Eyes wide open, tracking the slow-moving ceiling fan like it might offer her a different outcome if she stared long enough. Her arms were stiff by her sides. Her fingers tingled from clenching her fists too long. At some point past 3 a.m., she sat up, walked barefoot to the kitchen, and made herself tea. Not chamomile, not sleepy time blend. Earl Grey. Strong, no sugar. She needed to stay awake with it. Feel it on her tongue. Something bitter. Something real. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house. Outside, snow began to fall, soft dry flakes brushing against the window panes like someone whispering apologies too late. She pulled the binder back onto the kitchen table. Opened it again. This time she wasn't looking for answers. She was looking for proof. Page by page, she marked each transaction with a yellow highlighter. This one, $750 for the engagement photo shoot they insisted be done in Nashville because Ohio doesn't have the right aesthetic. This one, $600 for the rented gold flatware. Not real gold, just plated, just shiny enough for Instagram. She reached the catering page. $11,325. She remembered that meeting. Sitting across from Sarah and her mother, the same mother who didn't speak to her at the wedding while they debated whether the steak should be filet mignon or just sirloin with flair. Margaret had offered gently. What about a buffet? We could save some money. Make it more casual, more. Sarah had smiled. That smile, tight, thin, like a zipper closing around Margaret's voice. It's Benjamin's once-in-a-lifetime day. It should be elevated, should. That word again. Elevated. As if love had a price tag. As if family came with a style guide. She flipped to the page labeled entertainment. The jazz band was a splurge. She hadn't wanted music at all, said a playlist would do, but Benjamin had asked. Come on, Mom. It'll be cool. Real musicians. live music. You only get married once. She had said yes. She had always said yes. To violinists for the cocktail hour. To glass lanterns hanging from the ceiling. To Sarah's request for a champagne tower instead of a toast, it feels more vogue. It had been a slow erasure, one pretty decision at a time. By sunrise, Margaret had made a second cup of tea and sorted the binder into sections. Section A, paid in full. Section B, paid in part, remaining balance pending. Section C, cancelable. She stared longest at Section B, because Section B was leverage. It held the unpaid half of the venue, the second installment for the band, the post-wedding brunch caterer who was still awaiting confirmation, 3 major vendors, 3 open doors, and every single one of those contracts, every dotted line, every e-signature was hers, not Benjamin's, not Sarah's, hers. She stood slowly stretching her back until it cracked. In that moment, she didn't feel angry. She felt something heavier, something deeper, a recognition that she had built a life and then built a wedding on the belief that love would eventually be seen. That if she gave enough, was kind enough, quiet enough, generous enough, she would be remembered, honored, respected. But all she got in return was a folding chair behind the kitchen doors. And now she had nothing left to give, except clarity. She took one last look at the binder and whispered, "You thought I'd just sit there." She closed it. And with the precision of a woman who had spent 38 years budgeting for every storm that never made the news, she picked up her phone and began typing an email. The subject line was simple, RE final payment, wedding of Sarah and Benjamin. And the message, even simpler, due to breach of contract terms and the mistreatment of the client, the remaining balance will not be processed. Thank you for your understanding. Margaret Langley. The next morning, Margaret sat at her kitchen table as the sun cracked through the blinds, casting thin golden stripes across the pale blue walls. Her hands were wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, the one Benjamin had made in art class in 7th grade, back when he still called her Mama and brought home wrinkled permission slips and crayon drawings that hung on the fridge until they faded. She hadn't touched this mug in years, but today it felt right. Today it felt like a small act of rebellion, because yesterday she had been erased. Today she was starting to write herself back in. The local paper thudded onto her front porch around 6:12 a.m. like it always did. She didn't move to pick it up. Let it sit in the frost a while. Let the world go on without her for a few hours longer. She wasn't in the mood for obituaries or crossword puzzles. She was thinking about timelines, about every day of the last year that had been stolen for someone else's dream. March the cake tasting. Sarah didn't want Margaret's opinion, only her card. She had ordered 3 different flavors, none of which Margaret liked. Not that it mattered. "You're not really a dessert person, are you?" Sarah had laughed, eyes sparkling across the bakery table, like Margaret was a footnote in a recipe. June, the invitation proofing. When Margaret suggested listing both sets of parents as hosts, Sarah had patted her hand. "Oh, that's not really modern, Margaret. We're just going to go with our names, keeps it cleaner." Cleaner. Like cutting her out was a smudge they were wiping away. She walked slowly through the house, paused at the hall closet. Inside was the lavender coat she'd bought for the rehearsal dinner. It still smelled faintly of bergamot and hope. She ran her fingers over the collar, then closed the door. She wasn't putting that on again. Not ever. Instead, she pulled out a small wooden box from her desk. Inside were old receipts not from the wedding from Benjamin's childhood. The orthodontist's payment plan. The emergency room visit from when he split his chin on the swing set. The used Honda she'd scraped savings together for when he turned 16. Proof of love. In ink. In sacrifice. In all the ways a mother shows up without being asked. Margaret didn't cry. She had done that already in bathrooms, in supermarket aisles, behind sunglasses, in parking lots. Now she only felt stillness. A kind of centered, grounded quiet that comes not from peace, but from resolve. There was a difference. Peace forgives. Resolve remembers. That afternoon, she opened her laptop and started drafting letters, real ones, on formal letterhead. Not emotional emails, but contractual notifications. Clear, professional, absolute. One by one. To the band. Per Section 5.2 of our agreement, please be advised, the final payment will not be disbursed due to breach of service expectations. We will not require the remaining hours previously booked. To the caterer for the Sunday brunch, due to a change in family circumstances, the event has been canceled. No further services are necessary. Kindly do not invoice any balance. To the venue, this is to inform you that the final 30% of the rental fee will not be remitted due to the client being denied access to the contracted event space on the scheduled date. Consider this our official notice of termination for cause. She signed them all. Margaret Langley. No with regret. No sincerely. No apologies. Just a name. Firm and final. A woman not forgotten, but remembered by herself. When she sealed the envelopes, she looked over at the wedding program still lying on the dining table. Cream cardstock. Elegant cursive. Her name wasn't on it. Not as the mother of the groom. Not as a contributor. Not even as a guest. She picked it up, folded it once, then again, slid it into the trash. Not with anger, with precision. Let that be their keepsake. She had her own now. Contracts, ledgers, timelines, all pointing toward one irrefutable truth. You can't erase the woman who paid for the paper your lies were printed on. That night she slept. Not restlessly, not tearfully, but deeply. Because for the first time in over a year, she had made a decision that didn't come from guilt or hope or the longing to be accepted. It came from something older. Older than the dress she wore to the wedding. Older than her patience. It came from self-worth. It began with a voicemail. A short, crackling message left on Margaret's answering machine one damp Thursday morning as she was slicing a pear for breakfast. She almost didn't check it. She hadn't used her landline in months, and most people who mattered had stopped calling altogether. But that morning she pressed play. A male voice measured and clear. Margaret Langley. This is Paul Everett. Not sure if you remember me. I was your husband Richard's attorney back in '98. I came across your name in a contract review this week. Strange coincidence. Anyway, thought it might be worth a conversation. No rush, but if you're free, call me back. She stood frozen in the kitchen, the pear knife still in her hand, the fruit browning quietly beside her. Paul Everett. God, that name hadn't entered her mind in over 2 decades. And yet here it was, arriving like a breath of wind through a window she hadn't realized was cracked open. She returned the call later that afternoon. Paul answered on the 3rd ring. Margaret Langley. He said, voice warm with the kind of familiarity that comes from watching someone sign divorce papers in the rain. I wasn't sure you'd call me back. Well, she replied, stirring a lukewarm cup of tea. It's been a week of unexpected conversations. He chuckled. That it has. They talked for 15 minutes. Small updates. His retirement. Her garden. His sympathy about Richard's death. A man who had left both of them with little more than paperwork and debts. Then Paul said something that made her spine straighten. I came across your name because one of my current clients, a venue, actually flagged a contract. Partial payment, remaining balance unpaid. I was called in for a collections advisory. When I saw your signature, I paused. Her breath caught. You're being pursued for breach of contract, Margaret. But from what I understand, you never attended the event in question. Silence. She looked out the kitchen window, watching a squirrel dart across the fence. Its movements frantic, almost panicked. She envied it in a way. At least it had instinct. Direction. No, she said finally. I wasn't allowed inside. Paul cleared his throat. Then I'd say you may have grounds for a dispute, especially if there was a denial of access. That's a material breach on their end, depending on how the terms were written. He asked her to send over the contracts. She did every email, every scanned receipt. every note scribbled on hotel letterhead during that endless wedding year. By Monday, Paul called back. "You weren't just generous," he said, almost in disbelief. "You were the sole contractual signer on nearly every vendor agreement. Venue band catering, florals, photography, videography, transportation. All of it. You weren't a contributor. You were the client." And he said slowly, "They can't charge you for a service you were barred from attending. That's exclusion. That's denial of benefit. That's breach." Margaret sat down in her armchair, the one with the threadbare armrest and the tiny tear near the cushion. She exhaled slowly. The room was quiet. Outside, the wind rustled the dry branches of the dogwood tree she planted for Benjamin's 8th birthday. "So what do I do?" Paul's voice was calm. "You write them back. Every single one. Cite the clause. Deny payment. And if they push back, you let me know." She hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling. All this time she had thought she was helpless, the foolish old mother who paid and got forgotten. But no, she had power. Not just moral power, not just heartbreak. Legal power. Signed contracts. Clear evidence, names, dates, paper trails. That night, she typed the letters with surgical precision. "Due to a failure to provide access to the event I paid for and per Section 3.4 of our agreement outlining rightful participation of the contract holder, I am formally withdrawing any pending payments." She didn't need to raise her voice. The law would do that for her. Within days, the ripple began. The venue panicked first, then the band, then the photo studio. No wedding album. No edited videos. No final soundtrack files. Everything was on hold. Sarah's perfect wedding, the one with the custom seating chart, the rustic lantern centerpieces, the rented harpist for cocktail hour, began to crumble. Margaret had removed the keystone, and the entire arch came down. Margaret didn't post a thing. No Facebook updates, no passive-aggressive tweets, no cryptic inspirational quotes hinting at betrayal. She didn't need to. The silence did the work. Because when the band called Sarah and said they couldn't legally release the master audio until the final payment was processed by the contract holder, Sarah panicked. Not publicly, not yet. But the kind of panic that comes in waves, slow, suffocating, and completely out of your control. When the photographer emailed Benjamin to say that the photos wouldn't be finalized without a signed release from Margaret Langley, he didn't know what to say. And when the venue's final invoice was declined, and a lien threat was issued, the whispers began. At first, Sarah tried to keep it quiet. She messaged a few vendors herself, trying to explain that there had been a misunderstanding, that her husband's mother was being difficult, that they were working on it. But vendors don't like drama, especially vendors owed thousands of dollars. And within 2 weeks, one of them, the videographer, posted a vague but fiery comment on a public forum for wedding creatives. "When a mother pays for everything and isn't even allowed in the building, don't expect us to stay silent. Respect your benefactors." It got over 600 likes in 24 hours. And then someone found the original invoice. And someone else found Sarah's Pinterest board titled, "Our Dream Wedding Sponsored by Love and Grace," and noticed the stark absence of Benjamin's mother in any planned mention or tag. The comments shifted. From "Wow, that's such a beautiful gown," to "Wait, this seems off," to "Did y'all really exclude the woman who paid for it all?" Margaret didn't reply to anything. She read a few threads, yes, mostly out of curiosity. But she didn't comment, didn't explain, didn't defend herself. Instead, she baked banana bread, lemon muffins, zucchini loaf with just a hint of nutmeg. She gave them to her neighbor with the new baby, to the mailman, to the quiet boy down the street whose mother worked nights. Because Margaret wasn't wasting another minute of her life explaining herself to people who had decided her worth was conditional. Meanwhile, Sarah tried to spin. She posted a carefully worded Instagram story about navigating toxic family energy and setting boundaries around your big day. She quoted Glennon Doyle, used soft pastel filters, tagged healing and chosen family. But the comments came anyway. You used your MIL like a bank and then locked her out. Where's the photo of her at the wedding? Boundaries don't mean betrayal. It took 3 weeks for the story to hit local news. A lifestyle blogger from Columbus picked it up after her cousin, a former band member, shared the story anonymously. The blog post was titled, "She Paid for Everything and Wasn't Allowed in a Modern Wedding Horror Story." It was scathing, well-researched, emotionally devastating, and 100% true, because the receipts were real, and Margaret had kept them all. Benjamin sat in the break room of his office with his phone buzzing in his palm, sweat forming at the back of his neck. At first, he thought the article wouldn't matter, just a wedding blogger looking for views. But within hours, it spread like spilled wine on white linen. Someone at his firm forwarded it to HR. A partner walked past him in the hallway and gave a polite, measured smile, the kind that says, "I know." His inbox, once filled with congratulations and wedding gifts, now pulsed with silence. No one wanted to be near a man accused of locking his mother out of her own investment, especially not in a city like Columbus, big enough for buzz, small enough for grudges. At home, Sarah was spiraling. "I told you we should have made her sign something," she snapped, pacing their apartment barefoot, her gel manicure chipped at the edges. "She's sabotaging us." "She hasn't said a word," Benjamin muttered, sinking into the couch. "That's worse," Sarah shrieked. "She's letting other people speak for her. She's playing the victim. She's winning." Benjamin didn't respond, because for the first time in weeks, he wasn't sure Margaret was the villain. He remembered the lavender dress. He hadn't really looked at her that day, had barely registered her presence. He remembered her voice the night before the wedding. Calm, steady, hopeful. "I can't wait to see you walk down the aisle, Ben." And what had he said? Yeah, just get there early, okay? No thank you. No recognition. Just instructions. That night, he opened his laptop and went to the family folder in his drive. A folder Margaret had started for him in high school, scanned birth certificates, his college essay drafts, even a PDF of his Eagle Scout badge ceremony program. She'd managed his life like a personal archivist. And yet, he had let her stand outside in heels while strangers toasted her generosity. He clicked on the wedding vendor folder. Sure enough, every file was marked. Client Margaret Langley. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He wanted to text her. He typed, "Mom, I'm sorry." Then deleted it. Retyped. "Can we talk?" Deleted it again. Because what do you say to the woman who gave you everything and asked for nothing except to be allowed in? He clicked the article again. Reread the headline. She paid for everything and wasn't allowed in. For the first time, it hit him not as scandal, but as truth. Unfiltered, unforgiving. His truth. Sarah thought the worst had passed. She told herself the article would fade, just another piece of wedding drama in the digital wind. People would move on to the next scandal, the next viral video, the next petty betrayal dressed in florals and hashtags. But the internet didn't move on. Not this time. It started with a comment, then a thread, then a full Reddit post under RR wedding shaming titled, "Bride Kicks Mill Out of Wedding." She paid for full receipts included. Someone, likely a vendor, had uploaded screenshots of the itemized invoices, everyone listing Margaret Langley as the client. There were contracts, payment confirmations, even a polite email from Margaret adjusting the seating chart so the bride's grandparents could have a better view. The internet lit up. She did all this and wasn't allowed in. This is elder abuse disguised as modern boundaries. I hope Sarah gets blacklisted by every vendor in the Midwest. Margaret stayed silent. She didn't post a single word, but the world did it for her. TikTokers made dramatic reenactments. Twitter flooded with hashtag Justice for Margaret. Wedding vendors started tagging Know Your Clients and Respect Who Pays campaigns on their socials. Even BuzzFeed picked it up. And with that, Sarah's image cracked. Her employer, a branding agency that prided itself on ethical storytelling, issued a statement the next day. While we value personal privacy, our team is held to a standard of compassion and transparency. Due to recent public allegations, we've made the difficult decision to end our contract with Ms. Langley Cruz. Just like that, Sarah lost her job. The same job she once bragged Margaret wouldn't understand because branding is about perception, not reality. At home, Benjamin sat in the dark. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts from college friends, DMs from old coworkers, a voicemail from his aunt that simply said, "What the hell did you let happen?" The worst one came from his childhood best friend. "She gave up everything for you, bro. And you let her stand outside like the help. I can't look at you the same." Sarah turned defensive, blamed toxic online culture, called it a witch hunt, even suggested that Margaret had planted the whole thing. "She planned this, Ben. Don't you see it? She's manipulative. She wanted attention. She's turning people against us." Benjamin stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. "Maybe she didn't have to turn anyone," he said quietly. "Maybe people just saw the truth." The fight started. Small ones at first, then louder, then cruel. Sarah accused him of being spineless. He accused her of being heartless. She called his mother a parasite. He called her a fraud. By the end of the week, he slept on the couch. By the next week, he wasn't sleeping at all. And Margaret, she baked. She read novels, watered her garden, went for walks. When asked by her neighbor if she was okay, she simply smiled and said, "Sometimes things fall apart so the silence can speak for you." Sarah tried to pivot. She posted a carousel of black and white photos from the wedding, the ones that had been saved before the videographer locked the raw footage behind an unpaid invoice. Each photo came with long, heartfelt captions. "Our wedding was not about perfection. It was about love. And sometimes love means protecting your peace." Another, "Family is complicated. We did the best we could. Sometimes you have to put yourself first." But the comments weren't buying it. "Did you protect your peace by freezing out the woman who paid for your flowers? Girl, it wasn't your money. Peace doesn't wear a $4,000 dress someone else bought." The photos were taken down within hours. That week, Sarah held a crisis Zoom with her former college sorority sisters, the ones she used to call her branding board. She wept on camera, mascara clinging to her cheeks. "She's ruining me," she said. She knew exactly what she was doing when she didn't come inside. She wanted people to notice. She wanted to be a martyr. But even they were quiet, because even among friends, silence speaks louder than defense. Margaret never responded. She didn't open a Twitter account, didn't email journalists, didn't offer statements. She simply went to the grocery store, smiled at the cashier, and paid in cash. Powerfully ordinary. That was her revenge. Benjamin, meanwhile, stopped logging into LinkedIn altogether. He had once been the golden sun, charming, dependable, rising fast in his firm. Now his inbox sat full of flagged messages from clients and colleagues questioning his judgment. "You seemed like such a family man. I would have expected better from someone raised with Midwest values. You let your own mother be treated like a stranger at her own son's wedding." He stopped going out after work, stopped checking the wedding album, stopped looking at Sarah. And then came the lawsuit threats. One from the photo vendor, one from the DJ, one from the floral company claiming breach of contract. But none of them were addressed to Sarah. Every envelope bore his name, because he had listed himself as husband of the client, not client. And the actual client, Margaret Langley, the one with the receipts, the one who'd pulled every string, the one whose signature still held weight in a courthouse. Sarah paced the living room barefoot, rage building like static in the air. "I can't breathe in this house anymore," she said one night, throwing a wine glass against the sink. Benjamin looked at her. "I think that's because there's no room for anyone but you." The apartment began to feel like a museum of performance. The framed wedding photos on the wall all strategically cropped. No Margaret. No hint that the woman who paid for the lace-trimmed veil and the imported peonies even existed. The guest book on the coffee table signed with florid notes from Sarah's cousins and college friends. Not one from Benjamin's side, not one from his mother. It had all been curated, orchestrated. and now it was unraveling like thread pulled too tight. Sarah began spending nights at her sister's house. "I need space," she said, throwing her laptop and skincare routine into a tote bag. Benjamin didn't argue, because deep down he understood she wasn't looking for space. She was escaping accountability, and her sister's house had no lavender dresses in the closet, no receipts, no questions, only a curated echo chamber. The wedding photographer officially canceled the editing contract. "We no longer feel ethically comfortable delivering a product that contradicts what actually happened," they wrote. Sarah sent back a blistering email threatening legal action. They responded by publicly releasing a statement: "We stand with clients who are treated with dignity. No photo is worth erasing someone's humanity." That was the final straw. Sarah lost her second freelance contract. A luxury lifestyle brand she'd worked with dropped her, quietly citing reputation concerns. And when she came home the following weekend, she threw the mail on the table like a warning. "We are done," she said, her voice flat. "I am not going to live like this, haunted by a woman who doesn't even use the internet." Benjamin didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just stared at her. "You were never haunted by her," he said slowly. "You were threatened by the idea that she mattered more than your ego." Sarah scoffed. "She bought her way in." "No," he said, standing now. "She earned her place. You just locked the door." Sarah left that night for good. No tears. No hugs. Just the sound of heels on hardwood, the soft click of the elevator button, and the hiss of a cab driving away. Benjamin stood at the window for a long time after she was gone. Later that week, he pulled out the box Margaret had mailed him 3 months earlier. At the time, he hadn't even opened it. It had arrived the day after the wedding. A plain cardboard package, no note inside, just neatly labeled folders. Contracts, invoices, guest list, original, venue seating, initial plan. And at the bottom of the box, a lavender ribbon, the one she had worn in her hair, tied around a folded slip of paper. He untied it slowly, as if it might disintegrate in his hands. One sentence in Margaret's handwriting: "You don't need to say sorry. You just need to see clearly." He sat with that sentence for a long time. And then he did something he hadn't done since college. He picked up the phone and called his mother. It rang twice. Then her voice came through, gentle, unsure. "Satam Ben." And for a moment he said nothing, because the lump in his throat was too thick, the shame too real. Until finally, in a voice no louder than breath, he whispered, "Can I come home?" Margaret didn't hit post. She didn't film herself crying in a car or standing in front of a softly lit bookshelf holding a mug that said gratitude. She didn't write a memoir-length Facebook status. No thread on Twitter. No videos on TikTok. No war of words. She didn't need them, because power, real power, never rushes to explain itself. But she did send an email, just one, to a former colleague of her late husband, someone who now worked at a mid-sized regional paper and owed Margaret more than one favor from years ago when she had helped care for his mother during chemo. The subject line was short: a wedding, a truth. She attached a folder of scanned PDFs, contracts, deposits, timelines, screenshots of group chats, her check stubs from the year leading up to the wedding. One labeled "Final Payment Not Completed, See Notes." In the body of the email, she simply wrote, "I'm not seeking attention, just the truth. I was told I couldn't attend the wedding I paid for. I stood outside for 3 hours. These are the receipts. Do what you will. I'm going back to my garden." 3 days later, the article dropped. Not flashy, not clickbait, just brutal journalistic fact. The title: "She Paid for the Wedding. She Wasn't Allowed In." The subhead read, "A quiet Ohio mother spent her life savings on her son's big day and watched it through a window." It spread like fire in dry grass. Not because it was salacious, but because it was real. No melodrama, no shouting, just the soft, devastating thud of a truth too raw to ignore. Mothers reposted it with heartbreak. Sons reposted it with guilt. Brides-to-be reposted it with a warning: "Don't be this person." Within a week, it hit national media. Morning shows debated it. Podcasts picked it up. A wedding planner on TikTok went viral for breaking down how clients without a seat at the table are still the ones footing the bill emotionally and financially. Margaret never responded to any of it. She pruned her tomato plants, listened to vinyl jazz records in her slippers, took long walks, and waved to neighbors like nothing had changed. Because for her, nothing had. She wasn't seeking justice. She was living it. Quietly. Completely. The only nod she made to the article was in the form of a simple thank you note, handwritten to the reporter who'd written the piece. "You let the facts speak for me." That was more than enough. Meanwhile, Benjamin read every word of the article 3 times. He read it with his mouth dry, his heart aching, his hands trembling, because he recognized every timestamp, every quote. And yet none of it sounded like the mother he thought he knew. This wasn't the woman who left gift baskets at his door in college. This wasn't the woman who sat through freezing bleachers to watch him strike out and still called it a great game. This wasn't just his mother. This was a woman who carried the weight of grace like armor, and she'd worn it silently while they handed her shame. Benjamin didn't arrive with a speech. He didn't bring flowers, didn't knock with dramatic urgency, didn't stand in the rain waiting for forgiveness. He just showed up on a Tuesday wearing the same navy coat his mother had bought him 5 Christmases ago. The lining was starting to fray at the wrists, but he hadn't noticed until now. He stood at the edge of her porch, hands tucked deep in his pockets, as if shame might be something you could keep from spilling out. Margaret was watering her hydrangeas. She saw him from the corner of her eye, but didn't look up right away. Instead, she finished tending the roots, letting the silence stretch long enough to humble them both. When she finally turned to him, she said, "You came without calling." It wasn't sharp, wasn't cruel, just true. Benjamin nodded, throat thick. "I didn't know what to say." Margaret placed the hose down, coiling it neatly, the same way she had done for decades. There was still grace in her routine elegance in every movement. It reminded him of childhood, of hot July days, and the smell of cut grass and safety. She walked past him, opened the screen door, and paused. "You can come in, but only if you come in as a son, not as a man looking for a loophole." Benjamin stepped forward, and for the first time in years, he felt small in the right way, like someone returning to the only place that had never asked him to be anything but loved. Inside, nothing had changed. The same beige carpet, the same old couch with the quilt his grandmother made, the wooden bookshelf with his childhood trophies dusted, polished, still waiting. He sat down without speaking. Margaret brought 2 mugs of coffee, one with cream, just the way he liked it. He hadn't told her, but she remembered. Of course she did. They sat in silence, not awkward, not tense, just quiet enough for the truth to fill the room. After a while, Benjamin said, "I saw the article." Margaret didn't flinch. He continued, "You didn't write it, but it was your handwriting in every document. I didn't know how much you kept, how much you carried. You didn't try to ruin us. You could have, but you didn't." Margaret looked at him steady. "I don't believe in ruining people, Ben. I believe in revealing them." He dropped his gaze. She raised a hand. "Don't apologize yet. Not until you understand what you're apologizing for." He looked up, startled. "It's not just about the wedding," she said. "It's not even about being left outside. It's about a lifetime of being seen as optional. And I was never optional, Ben. I was the foundation." The words hit like scripture. Not angry, not loud. Just the kind of truth that leaves a mark deep enough to shift the way you walk. Margaret stood up. She walked over to a drawer, pulled out a manila envelope, and placed it on the table between them. Benjamin looked at it. "What's this?" "The final payment I never signed. The vendors are still chasing it. If you want to settle it with your name on the check, do it. But if you want me to pay it, I'll send it. And we'll both know what that means." He stared at the envelope, his hands motionless. "What would it mean?" "That nothing has changed," Margaret said. "That I'm still cleaning up after a mess you let someone else make with my name." He didn't touch the envelope. Instead, he looked at her tears gathering not just for the wedding, but for every time he let her eat, last take, the couch give up her coat. And he asked, "How do I change it?" She took a deep breath, then finally smiled. "You start by doing one thing I never asked you to do before. You stand up for me not because I'm your mother, but because I mattered." That night, Benjamin didn't go home. He stayed in the guest room, the same room that had once been his back, when posters of astronauts lined the walls and glow-in-the-dark stars were still stuck to the ceiling. Margaret hadn't taken them down, not because of sentimentality, but because she'd always known he'd come back. He slept deeply for the first time in weeks. No anxiety dreams, no sudden wake-ups, just quiet. In the morning, Margaret made oatmeal, thick, cinnamon-heavy, the kind he hated as a kid, but devoured now. She slid the bowl in front of him and poured coffee into his cup before he asked. Neither of them talked much. But when he finished, Margaret set her spoon down and looked at him fully. "You'll need to go back today," she said. "I know," Benjamin replied. "And not just physically. I mean, you'll need to return with a spine, Ben. Not with shame, not with guilt, but with intention." He nodded slower this time. "Sarah still thinks she can spin this," he added. Sarah, Margaret said, thinks silence is weakness. She doesn't know it's armor. He stayed 2 more days. Long enough to repaint her fence, fix a loose shingle, and dig out the weeds along the driveway. He didn't ask for thanks. She didn't offer praise. It was understood this was a kind of penance neither of them would say out loud. On the 3rd morning, he packed his coat, picked up the envelope Margaret had left on the table, and paused at the door. "Mom," she turned from the sink. "Yes, love. I never saw how strong you were." She smiled faintly. "That's the trick. You don't show strength. You live it so loudly in silence that one day when they need it, they'll remember it was always there." Back in the city, Benjamin requested a meeting with every vendor. He showed them the envelope. He signed every check with his own name. And in every meeting, he said one sentence before handing over the payment. This should have never fallen on her. The florists cried. The DJ gave him a silent nod. The venue manager simply said, "It's good to see a son show up." Sarah, meanwhile, tried one last stunt. A personal blog post titled, "The Wedding No One Understood." She talked about pressure, about privacy, about navigating generational trauma. She painted herself as a woman overwhelmed by family politics, gaslight by a mother-in-law who chose spectacle over intimacy. It barely made a ripple. People had seen the documents, heard the silence, felt the truth. Her words came too late and from the wrong voice. Margaret at home clipped lavender from the yard. She packed 2 small boxes for donation. One held the lavender dress. The other, the ribbon she'd worn in her hair. She folded both neatly and taped them shut. On the side of the second box, she wrote in black marker, "Letting go is not the same as forgetting." That afternoon, she received a letter, an invitation from the very reporter who had first published her story. They were hosting a local panel on elder dignity and financial abuse. They wanted Margaret to be the keynote speaker. She declined, but in her reply, she sent back one sentence. "I'm not a speaker. I'm a map. Let people find their own way. I just made mine clear." Benjamin returned to his mother's house alone again, but this time not as a son crawling back in shame. This time he came wearing a suit, hair combed, eyes sharp, voice steady, because now he had a mission. The fallout had spiraled fast. News outlets had picked up follow-ups. Podcasts debated who really owes what in a family. A morning show panel asked, "Is this what happens when we forget gratitude?" Benjamin's name wasn't trending, but it wasn't forgotten either. Sarah had panicked. She called him nearly every night, switching from anger to desperation in a single breath. Tell them she lied. Make a public statement. Threaten the paper. Ask your mother to clear it up. Each request came like a splash of cold water over barely healing skin. But Benjamin no longer jumped. He listened. And then finally, he drove back to the woman whose silence had moved the earth under him. Margaret was in the garden again. Always the garden. She didn't look up when he parked, didn't rise when he approached, just snipped a dying blossom with steady hands. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Benjamin swallowed. "Mom, I need you to help me fix this." Margaret tilted her head slightly. "Fix what exactly?" "The article. The perception. People think I—" He paused, unable to finish. "They think I don't love you. Did you—" The question wasn't cruel, but it shattered him more than a scream would have. He took a breath. Tried again. "Sarah wants you to retract, or clarify, or—" Margaret finally turned to him, eyes steady, mouth firm, and in her hands a manila folder, the same one from the table, the one he hadn't signed. She held it out. "This is what you want, right?" He nodded. "You want me to sign this, finish paying for the wedding, clear your name, save your pride." He hesitated. "Yes." Margaret set the folder on the garden table between them. "If I wasn't welcome when your world was dressed in flowers," she said, "don't ask me to stand beside you now that the petals have rotted." Benjamin's lips parted, stunned. But she wasn't done. "You want forgiveness," she said, "but you haven't even asked for understanding." He dropped into the garden chair across from her. The weight of what she said, what she meant, coiled in his chest like smoke. He had come seeking resolution, but she offered truth. And truth doesn't always soothe. Sometimes it stings so deeply it carves out something new inside you. Margaret stood. "I don't owe Sarah my silence. I don't owe you my image. All I ever gave was love. And you treated it like it came with strings. It didn't. But that doesn't mean it came without cost." As she turned to go, Benjamin called out, "Then tell me how to pay it." Margaret paused. "You can't." "Then what do I do?" She looked back at her, voice quieter now. "You live with the knowing. And if that knowing turns you into a better man, then maybe, just maybe, I'll sit beside you again someday. Not as a burden, but as someone who survived your indifference." Sarah wasn't built for pressure, not the kind that came without a warning label or a media plan. She had spent her adult life curating the perfect aesthetic whitewashed kitchens, soft neutrals, linen dresses, a golden retriever she named Winston after a Wes Anderson movie. But none of it was made to survive scrutiny. And scrutiny had moved in like black mold. The news cycle had slowed, but the damage lingered like a sour aftertaste. Old clients ghosted her. Wedding blogs she once contributed to now ran op-eds titled, "When the Bride Becomes the Bully, What We Learn from the Margaret Langley Story." Even her former colleagues had started whispering. Not loudly, not publicly, but she felt it in the silence after meetings, in the forgotten email invites, in the way no one laughed when she made a joke. Sarah tried to shift the narrative one last time. She launched a mini campaign, a soft pastel-toned video where she addressed the pain of intergenerational conflict, sipping tea, holding back tears. She never named Margaret, but everyone knew. The video tanked. Comments were locked within an hour. The post disappeared the next day. That night, Sarah sat on the floor of their half-furnished living room, the one they had planned to remodel after the honeymoon. The wall still held sticky notes of paint, swatches, eggshell cream, warm linen, October fog. Now the only fog was in her head. Winston, her beloved brand-friendly dog, wouldn't come near her. He sat by the door waiting for Benjamin, the man she'd called soft, the man she'd weaponized, the man she'd lost. She called him. 3 rings. Voicemail. "Ben, I know I made mistakes, but your mother is turning people against us. She's not innocent. You know she's not. Please, just talk to me. Please." She didn't cry, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't anymore. The tears had dried up weeks ago, somewhere between the podcast takedowns and the influencer callouts. Somewhere between losing her job and watching a stranger write her story better than she could spin it. Meanwhile, Benjamin was on a bench in a quiet park. The same bench his mother used to take him to as a child, with peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and juice boxes that were always a little too warm. He had just come from his lawyer's office. not to sue anyone, but to change the power of attorney on Margaret's behalf voluntarily, to make sure her future would never again rest on someone else's mercy. He pulled out his phone, played Sarah's voicemail again, paused, deleted it. There was no rage in him anymore, just the weight of knowing, like Margaret had said, the knowing that you can't undo a door left unopened, but you can decide never to leave it shut again. 2 weeks after Benjamin's visit, Margaret received a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a text. A letter, thick, expensive paper, the kind that rustles with weight. It was from a law firm representing Sarah. The tone was polite. The request was simple. We kindly ask that your client, Ms. Margaret Langley, release a public clarification stating that she holds no ill will toward the couple and regrets any misunderstanding caused by her absence from the wedding. Margaret didn't finish reading it. She folded it neatly, set it aside, and placed a coaster on top of it like it was just another nuisance from a world that still thought silence meant surrender. That evening, she baked banana bread. No social media photo, no clever caption, just flour under her nails and the scent of cinnamon floating through the air like memory. She listened to Ella Fitzgerald on vinyl and drank tea that had steeped a bit too long. The world, that noisy, clawing, image-obsessed world, could keep spinning. Margaret had already stopped trying to keep up. The next morning, Benjamin arrived without warning. This time he brought no guilt, only groceries. He helped her unpack in silence, washed the fruit, and made coffee. Then he said the words she hadn't heard since he was a boy with muddy shoes and scraped knees. "What do you want for your birthday, Mom?" Margaret looked up slightly amused. "I want peace. Done. And no apologies." Even better. They smiled. Later that week, Margaret mailed a response to Sarah's lawyer. It wasn't a statement. It wasn't a retraction. Just 3 documents. The original contract for the wedding venue with her signature and payment details. The final invoice still unpaid. A copy of her letter to the vendors releasing Benjamin from future liability dated 2 weeks ago. No cover letter. No explanation. Just the truth, folded 3 times and sealed with calm. Sarah never responded, because sometimes the most devastating answer is no answer at all. That Sunday, Benjamin brought Winston by. The dog hesitated at first, then curled up under Margaret's kitchen table like he had never known another home. Benjamin stayed for dinner, roasted chicken herby potatoes, Margaret's famous lemon pie. He asked if he could visit again next week. "You can come by whenever you're not pretending I'm invisible," she said. "Then I guess I'll be here often," he replied, smiling gently. Margaret stood at the sink as he packed up to leave. Before he walked out, she turned and said softly, "You didn't lose me, Ben. I just stopped waiting." He looked at her eyes full, not of tears, but understanding. "I know," he said. "And I'm sorry it took this long to arrive." Sarah didn't slam the door. She didn't scream. Didn't throw his things onto the lawn. Didn't even cry. She simply left. Took 2 suitcases, her skincare fridge, and Winston's old leash, though the dog had long since decided which side of the silence he preferred. No note. No goodbye. Just the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the doorway like a ghost that didn't know it had already left. It happened on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic weekend breakup. Not the climax of a public fight. Just one quiet day when Benjamin came home, and the house wasn't angry anymore. It was empty. The media had moved on. New scandals, new mothers, new weddings. But for Benjamin, the storm hadn't passed. It had settled inside him. His inbox stayed quiet. The firm politely encouraged him to take indefinite leave. Colleagues stopped replying. Old friends sent vague texts, but never followed through. The shame didn't shout, it whispered. And that was worse. One night after a dinner of takeout he couldn't taste, and a bottle of wine that didn't help, Benjamin packed a single duffel bag. Not because he had to, but because he finally wanted to stop pretending the apartment still felt like home. He drove 5 hours through the night. Didn't call, didn't text. When he arrived, the porch light was on. Always was. He stood at the door for several minutes, unsure if he was knocking as a son or a stranger. Margaret opened the door without surprise. She didn't gasp, didn't reach for him, didn't offer warmth wrapped in a question. She simply stepped aside. Come in if you're tired of standing where you no longer belong. He walked in, shoes muddy, eyes hollow, heart heavier than his bag. The kitchen looked the same. The scent of rosemary and baked bread clung to the air like memory refusing to fade. Benjamin stood awkwardly like a guest who didn't know where to sit. Margaret walked past him and pulled out a chair at the table. Not the one near the edge, the one at the center, the one opposite hers. The place where family sits. She didn't say welcome back. She didn't say I forgive you. She said nothing. But she placed a cup of warm tea in front of him and sat across from him like an equal. And for the first time in his life, Benjamin understood what grace looked like. It wasn't a hug. It wasn't tears. It was a chair pulled out for you after you'd burned the whole house down. The first few days weren't filled with conversations. They were filled with chores. Margaret handed Benjamin a rake the next morning, the maple outbacks shedding early. No apology, no explanation, just instruction. And he took it, raked quietly under a gray Ohio sky, his movement slow, unsure like a man learning his body all over again. By the end of the week, he had cleaned the gutters, replaced the loose tiles on the shed, and fixed the squeaky back gate. Margaret never praised him. But each time she set an extra plate at the table or folded his shirt with the sleeve turned in just right, he knew. She saw. On the fifth evening, Margaret finally asked, "What are your plans?" Benjamin paused. He was stirring soup, the kind with barley and carrots and memory. To rebuild. Start something I can be proud of. And Sarah, he didn't flinch this time. She left. And I let her. Because... He exhaled long and low. Because I finally understood that survival isn't the same thing as success. Margaret nodded slowly. Good. Now build something that doesn't need to hurt someone to stand. They began to walk each morning, 2 cups of black coffee in hand across the park trail where Benjamin once rode his bike without training wheels. They spoke in small truths. About her arthritis. About his insomnia. About the book she'd been writing quietly on grief and mothers who disappear long before they die. Benjamin offered to help her self-publish. She declined. I don't write to be known, she said. I write to remember who I was before the silence. By the 3rd week, they developed a rhythm. Benjamin helped Margaret set up an online course in estate law and elder financial literacy, something she had quietly studied for years, but never had the platform to share. They launched a modest website, uploaded her first video. Within days, it had thousands of views, not because it was polished, but because it was true. A woman who had once been left out of her own story, now teaching others how to write and guard theirs. One evening, they sat on the porch watching the sun collapse gently into the fields beyond the backyard. Benjamin asked, "Do you think people can really change?" Margaret didn't answer right away. She looked out into the gold light, her face calm. Then, no. Benjamin blinked. No. She smiled slightly. I think they can return to the part of themselves they buried. And sometimes, that's even harder than changing. Fall had nearly passed. The leaves in Margaret's yard now blanketed the ground like silent prayers, red gold and copper memories she chose not to rake just yet. It was the kind of season where the air smelled like wood smoke and closing chapters. The kind where people reached for warmth not just from sweaters, but from people they had once taken for granted. Benjamin was in the kitchen again chopping onions, his eyes watering for more than one reason. Margaret watched from the hallway. He had grown thinner, softer in a good way. The kind of soft that wasn't weakness but wisdom. The kind of soft that comes when a man has let go of proving himself and starts offering himself instead. That night, as they cleared the dishes together, Benjamin finally said it. Mom. Margaret turned towel in hand. Yes. He looked down at the empty plate in his hands, then back at her. I failed you. She didn't rush to deny it. Didn't say you didn't. Didn't try to comfort him out of discomfort. She let it land. Let him hold the weight of it in his own hands. Then gently she said, yes, you did. But you came back. He set the plate down. His voice cracked a whisper now. I missed you. I missed the me I was when you were around. Her eyes welled, not with tears of sadness, but with recognition. For the first time in years, she saw him. Not the boy she raised, not the man who walked away, but the person who chose to return. With nothing to gain, and everything to rebuild. She walked toward him. No grand gesture, no cinematic score, just the creak of old floorboards beneath tired feet. She stopped in front of him, looked into his eyes, those same eyes that once begged for 5 more minutes of cartoons and now begged for 5 more minutes of grace. Then finally, Margaret opened her arms. Benjamin fell into them. No words, no conditions, just the embrace of a mother who had spent years holding herself together so that one day she might hold her son again without breaking. The hug wasn't long, but it was final. Not the end of a relationship, but the end of distance. The closing of a space too wide for words and too deep for apologies. They sat on the porch afterward, side by side. No need to fill the silence. The stars above them were quieter than usual, as if even the sky knew it was witnessing something sacred. Benjamin turned to her, finally asking, "Do you think I deserve this?" Margaret smiled softly, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. "I think you stayed. And sometimes staying after the damage is the bravest kind of love there is." And with that, the story closed. Not with revenge, not with noise, but with a seat at the table, a hug that waited, and the kind of peace that only comes when truth is finally met with presence. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of strength, of silence, of second chances, then don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their worth. And if you have a story, even just a whisper of one, drop it in the comments. Thank you.